Twelfth Night and Hamlet on the same stage. And both these, it seems a bit odd combination. Hamlet, this dark, claustrophobic revenge tragedy, and Twelfth Night, one of Shakespeare's most famous and popular comedies, full of disguises and pranks and wit, songs. What could be more different? But they were both written about the same time. They seem to have both been written around 1601. What was going through Shakespeare's mind that he writes this 4.5 hour dire tragedy, philosophical play, and then he writes this one that's got like a goofy clown in it and pranks? What was he thinking about? What goes together? Well, I think, and this is the main thing I want to talk about, I think what binds these plays is the question of identity. So in Hamlet, we've got, I talked about this last week, this hero who's an existential hero. He's trying to define himself through actions, but he finds himself stymied because he lives in the world of ambiguity. He doesn't know what's true. He doesn't know if the mission he has said he'd undertake, the mission of revenge, is a just one. And so he's lost, trying to define himself, thinking about his consciousness, thinking about how to live in this world. Twelfth Night is also largely about identity. We have characters in this play who experiment with identity. We have characters who change apparently gender, who take on different voices, who adopt different personalities, change themselves in order to please someone. We have people with mistaken identities. In some ways, this play is very topical. It's about identity politics. It's about pronouns. We all know what this is about, right? I mean, I go to meetings sometimes and I have to say, "Hi, I'm Paul Budra. My pronouns are thee and thou." And I identify as tall and slender. I'm sort of trans-slender. But you'll see, the pronouns get really confusing in this play. And the fact that it's about identity, I think we get a tip-off about that from the title, Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night was a night of celebration in the Elizabethan calendar. It was the 12th night after Christmas Day. For Catholics, it was the eve of the Feast of Epiphany. And on this day, which marked the last day of Christmas celebrations, people goofed around. You drank, you ate, but also people would dress up. Sometimes they'd role play. Masters would serve servants, and servants would pretend to be masters. And they would play this game called King of the Bean. So you get a cake, and you put a bean in it somewhere, and you bake the cake, and then everyone gets a slice of cake. And whoever gets the slice with the bean is king of the bean and gets to rule for the day. We're bringing that back. So you take on a fake identity just for fun. Another thing that points out why this play might be about identity is the subtitle, or What You Will. What you will. That's pretty open-ended. What you want, what you desire, what you will be, what you can do. Who knows? Another reason why this play is about identity is because it features twins. Shakespeare stole this. He stole it from the Roman playwright Plautus, who wrote a play called The Menachmi. And in that, there's a pair of identical twins who have been split forever, and then they come together in a town, and comic chaos ensues. Shakespeare uses this device twice. In Comedy of Errors, where he doubles the twins. Not one set of twins, two sets of twins. And this play, where he has the twins being a boy and a girl. Right? Still look similar, especially if the girl dresses like a boy. But anyway, twins, is anyone here an identical twin? You are. And do you ever have problems with like people identifying and stuff like that?
Yeah, my favorite moment was when my brother spotted me playing tag, but he ran into a mirror.
Oh my God. That is brilliant. But I mean, so there's something, twins, there's something about that can sort of throw you. I have a colleague named David, who's a classicist at SFU, and I bumped into him one day in a store downtown, and we just had a little chat, right? And I said, okay, bye, David. And I turned around, and there he was again. And I lost it. I was just, because I had no idea he was a twin. And it makes you not painfully aware, but hyper aware of this question of identity. Who's who when you have twins? All those things point to that. Now, what I'm going to do now is give a summary of the play, and then I'm going to come back and deal with different aspects of this idea of identity. So, to summarize this play, it's actually a little bit difficult. It's easier to summarize Hamlet than it is to summarize this play. And the reason for that is Hamlet is a tragedy. Tragedies are usually about one person, the guy in the title of the play, and we know the storyline, he's going to die. Right? Tragedies focus on the individual facing his or her own mortality. And for this reason, the vast majority of tragedies do not have a subplot. They're about that one person careening towards their demise. The only play from this tragedy in Shakespeare that has a full subplot is King Lear. But all the rest, they're focused on one individual. So it's easy to tell the story. Comedies are different. Comedies are not about the individual facing mortality. They're about a community surviving. They're about people getting married so that they can have kids, so they can grow up, and they can marry. The great Canadian literary critic Northrop Frye used to say that comedy celebrates the herd instinct. It's about our community continuing, right? We have a lot of problems, but it's all going to be okay. And because of that, comedies have usually a broader range of characters that are in tragedy, from the lowest to the highest. And very often they have more than one plot, because you have more people, you have a bigger community, they're all having different adventures. So very often in comedy you have a subplot. And this is true to this day. If you watch a lot of television sitcoms, very often there'll be a main plot and a subplot. So it's a little hard to summarize, but I'll do my best. So main plot. And just as in Hamlet, there's a little bit of pre-story, a bit of action that happens before the play begins. In this case, it is a shipwreck. And if you were here last class, you remember I said, don't trust ghosts. Here's another little piece of wisdom for you. If you're ever in a Shakespeare play, don't get on a boat. Never ends well. On this ship were the twins, Viola and Sebastian. And they lost each other, and both assume the other is dead. All right? Viola washes up on the shores of Illyria with the sea captain, who I guess decided not to go down with the ship. And the sea captain says, okay, you're in Illyria. And the guy who runs Illyria is Duke Orsino. And Viola says, Duke Orsino, my father has talked about Duke Orsino, implying the father knew Duke Orsino. So, let's stop there for a minute. Let's imagine that you, heaven forbid, wash up on the shores of Haida Gwaii, and then you discover that there's someone nearby that's a family friend. I think your first reaction would be to go to that person and say, hey, you know my dad, can I have a sandwich, something? Instead, Viola says, and this is perhaps the most inexplicable decision that any Shakespearean character makes, and that's saying something. She says, I know what I'll do. I will dress like a man and become Orsino's servant. And this is what she does. And she commits to it. We do not see her in women's clothes for the rest of the play. Only see her that one scene at the beginning dressed as a woman. And we don't hear her name, Viola, until the very end of the play. Till the very end, she is known as Cesario, her male name. And Shakespeare's audience would not have had a program, right? So they would have no idea that this person is anyone but, or they would come to think of her as Cesario. So that's a commitment. So she goes to work for Orsino, Duke Orsino. And Duke Orsino, he has the opening line of the play. If music be the food of love, play on. And I love that line because it's a good example to teach iambic pentameter, Shakespeare's verse. Shakespeare's verse was based not on rhyme but on rhythm. You set a bass rhythm and then you break it. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. Oh, that this too subtly flesh should melt. Da 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 da. 5 dots. Okay? But then we get to if music be the food of love, play on. Da da. If music be the food of love, play on. The last beat is wrong. It's drawn out. It's 2 heavy beats instead of a short beat and a heavy beat. So this means they have to be emphasized. And what Shakespeare is doing there is giving a clue to the actor on how to play this character. He's putting the psychology of the character into the rhythm of the verse. So Orsino is supposed to say that. It's like, if music be the food of love, play on. And in that one little phrase, we get his personality. Indulge me. Oh, I love it. Languorous, self-indulgent. And he is hopelessly in love with the Countess Ophelia. No one has ever been in love like Duke Orsino. No one, right? And interestingly, Countess Ophelia wants nothing to do with Duke Orsino, wants nothing to do with anyone, any suitors, because she is in deep mourning for the death of her father, but more immediately the death of her brother. Now, why would you set your heart on a woman who wants nothing to do with the world, who's wrapped up in grief? Well, so you can moon around and be languorous and feel sorry for yourself. And as I've talked about in past lectures, what we have here is an Elizabethan convention. The Petrarchan lover, Italian playwright Petrarch, sort of set the standard for this with a series of poems about how he loved a woman called Laura, but could never approach her. So he spent his whole life worshiping her from afar. And this became a cliche. And you have all sorts of poets around Shakespeare writing about this. And he parodies it in, say, Romeo. The young Romeo, before he meets Juliet, is just pining for, this Rosalind, he can't have her. Same with Orsino. Orsino asks Cesario to go to Olivia and proclaim his love. Cesario does, and she, pronouns, turns out to be really good at it. So good, Olivia falls in love with Cesario. Uh-oh. And when Cesario, that is Viola, figures it out, she is, oh my God, because I love Orsino. So, love triangle, right? Orsino loves Olivia, Olivia loves Cesario, Cesario loves Orsino. Now let's make it more complicated. We bring in Sebastian, the lost twin brother, who shows up in town, and immediately everyone mistakes him for Cesario. So there's a bunch of confusing things. He gets involved in a fight and stuff like that. But then Olivia sees who she thinks is, God, pronouns, is Cesario, and says, Cesario, please, 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 marry me. Sebastian has been in town for one day. One day. A strange woman comes up and says, marry me. And he goes, okay. And goes off and marries her. When Orsino finds out that his servant Cesario is married to Olivia, he freaks out, and it's only resolved when finally, we find out the Cesario is Viola. And then Orsino says, okay, well, I'll marry her. That's the main plot. The subplot, I don't go into as much detail, it's a little bit more complicated, as if it could be. You have within Olivia's household a group of people. You have her uncle, Sir Toby Belch. The name says it all. He's a party animal. He likes to drink, he likes to eat pickled herring. I grew up on pickled herring. Eastern European background. And he has a companion called Sir Ague-Cheek, Andrew Ague-Cheek. Weird name. The word ague means fever. So Ague-Cheek, sickly looking. And he's described as sort of tall and spindly with long blonde hair. And it's a strange friendship. Ague-Cheek is there because Toby has convinced him that he has a shot with Olivia. He doesn't because he's an idiot. But Sir Toby keeps pressing him. Why? Because Ague-Cheek is rich. Ague-Cheek is paying for the drinks. And so we have this relationship, which interestingly Shakespeare will duplicate in Othello. In Othello, the character Iago has a fellow called Rodrigo, and he keeps telling Rodrigo, you know what, you have a shot with Desdemona. And he's only saying that, drawing Rodrigo along to get Rodrigo's money. So the same thing's going on here. We have a couple other characters thrown into the mix. There's a character called Feste, who is a clown, a professional fool. He's not a fool like the fool in King Lear, who was what was called a natural fool. And this is someone who has, we would say, developmentally challenged. He is a professional entertainer, this guy. And he moves around and tells jokes appropriate to various situations. We'll look at him in a minute. Then there's Maria, a servant, the wily servant that you see in a lot of comedies. And this little trio, there's another character called Fabian who they don't have in this production, and in no production have I ever seen have they bothered putting Fabian on stage. Bit of a nothing, so we'll forget him. We get this trio, and they like to party. They like to drink, they like to sing, they like to make noise, and this has made them an enemy. The enemy is Malvolio, the household steward of Countess Olivia's house. And he does not party. He is called a Puritan. And a Puritan was an extreme form of Protestant in the Elizabethan period. They were part of the Protestant Reformation who thought the Reformation did not go far enough. They wanted to close all the theaters. Eventually they would in 1642. They were against cake and ales, and they thought that buttons on clothes were an invitation to lust. You look at a button, you might think about undoing it. So they hate him, and so they pull this elaborate prank on him. They convince him that the Lady Olivia is secretly in love with him, and that all he has to do is dress up in a bizarre way, smile in a bizarre way, act in a strange way, and she will just throw herself at him. Instead, she thinks he's gone insane, and they lock him up. They put him in a dark room, which was how they treated people with mental problems in this period. Not very effective. Locked him up in a dark room and sort of tease him, basically torture him for a while. So that's one prank. Another prank involves getting Ague-Cheek and Cesario to fight each other. And Ague-Cheek is a coward, and Cesario is Viola, who's probably never picked up a sword in her life. So it's a total mess of a duel. And that's the subplot. The subplot is a series of pranks. That's the play. At the end, again, everything comes together with the recognition of who Viola is, and we find out that Sir Toby will marry Maria, the serving girl, because he thought the prank they pulled was so funny. Good basis for a marriage. So, identity. I've already mentioned people are defining themselves. Viola has decided to define herself as this man, Cesario. We have Orsino, who's defining himself through this Petrarchan love, through mooning around, being this, tragic lover. In some ways, Olivia is like a Hamlet. She's defining herself by her grief, which everyone around her says is excessive. She's dressed in mourning. And it's very effective when you see the costume changes in this production. The other way that people define themselves in this play, and to this day, is through sexuality. And it's complicated. Sexuality is complicated today, right? We tend to think of sexuality as something very stable, and people realize their sexuality and they hang on to it, right? So I am straight, I am gay, I am bisexual. I always have sex with 3.14 partners. It was a bit more fluid in this period, and we see that fluidity here. Olivia falls in love with Cesario, but isn't that really lust? Because she barely knows this young man. And her sort of declaration of love is a little over the top. This is what she says to what she thinks is a young man, Cesario. By the roses of spring, by maidhood, honor, truth, and everything, I love thee so that maugre all thy pride, nor wit nor reason can my passion hide. I want you. Okay? Pretty strong. At the same time, think about what Cesario looks like. Cesario is Viola in drag. And he, oh dear, is described at one point by Orsino. Orsino describes Cesario saying, you're almost as pretty as a girl, all right? You have this ruby lips and you have this high little voice. So there's a weird sort of androgyny going on there, a strange confusion. And we have to remember this would be more confusing for Shakespeare's audience because Viola is played by a boy actor. So we have a boy playing a girl who's dressed as a boy, right, who girl falls in love with, and who another man says, oh, you look like a girl. What? It becomes very complicated. We get this androgyny here. We get this other sexual tension going on with Sebastian's friend, whom I haven't mentioned. Sebastian travels with a friend called Antonio. And Antonio really likes Sebastian. Really likes Sebastian. At one point, Sebastian leaves the stage, and Antonio says, the gentleness of all gods go with thee. I have many enemies in Orsino's court, else would I very shortly see thee there. But come what may, I do adore thee so. The danger shall seem sport, and I will go. That word adore had a lot of connotations in this period. It was sometimes used, speaking of the gods adore a certain person. But when it's person to person, it usually means desire. Later on, when Antonio meets up with Sebastian, he says, I could not stay behind you. My desire, more sharp than filed steel, did spur me forth. Not that I'll love to see you, though, etc. Anyway, there's this real subtext of Antonio really liking Sebastian. I don't know how to put it. There's a homoerotic tension between the two. And it's weird. Antonio and Sebastian, Shakespeare used those same names in The Merchant of Venice. In The Merchant of Venice, there's a character called Antonio. He's the merchant. He starts the play, who is infatuated with a young man called Sebastian. Interesting. So anyway, there's some sort of confusion here. And that confusion, the transvestite confusion, also raises the question of sexual desire in the audience, in the Elizabethan audience. The Elizabethan audience would never have a chance to see a woman on stage, right? What they would see were boys dressed as women, right? Sometimes playing characters who dress as boys. And They were very popular, these boys. But wherein lies the popularity? In the fact that they are mimicking women so well that people look at them and say, wow, that's a beautiful woman. Hubba hubba. Or is it because that's a good-looking boy? And male beauty was, celebrated in this period. Christopher Marlowe wrote this poem called Hero and Leander, where a naked young man, Leander, is swimming across the Hellespont, and the god Neptune looks up and says, wow, and goes up and starts tickling him and kissing him. And Leander says, you're making a mistake, I'm not a girl. And Neptune goes, yeah, I know. Or was it the appeal of the transvestism? There's a confusion of desire, and this play emphasizes this. Other factors of identity in this period: status, class status, incredibly important in this period. You were defined by your station. This affected everything about you, whether you could carry a weapon, what clothes you were allowed to wear, how people would address you, what pronouns they would use, thou or you. We're not used to that. We don't think that much in terms of class status, except when we get on airplanes, which I'm going to do tonight. And when I see, I'm in zone 18, okay. But in this period, it's all important. One of the reasons that Malvolio gets punished so badly is not just that he shouldn't presume to fall in love with Olivia, but because of his fantasies of class status. He has this soliloquy where he's thinking about what it would be like to have been married to her for a couple of months. So he says, having been 3 months married to her, sitting in my state. And the state is a fancy chair with a little canopy over it for people of elevated social status. Calling my officers about me in my branched velvet gown. There were rules about what the different classes could wear. These were called the sumptuary codes. It was illegal for certain classes to wear certain fabrics and colors. You had to be noble to wear velvet. I don't care if you can afford it. If you're an average Joe, you're not allowed to wear velvet. So he's imagining himself in a velvet gown, having come from a daybed. Daybed, come on. Again, rich, right? Social status. Where I have left Olivia sleeping. And she goes on and says, 7 of my people I'll send out, while I frown a while and perchance wind up my watch. Watches were a new technological thing. Crazy expensive, right? So he's imagining himself elevated in status with all the material wealth that comes with that. So he's a social climber. When he gets the opportunity, when he thinks Olivia loves him, he's on it. The person who really makes us aware of social distinction, however, is the clown Feste. Feste, as a professional entertainer, he has to be really careful. He wants to joke around with people, but he can't insult them. And what you're allowed to say to different classes of people depends on their class. You can make certain jokes with Sir Toby Belch in a drunken stupor, as opposed to Count Orsino. And Viola points this out in this speech. She says, this fellow, the fool, is wise enough to play the fool, and to do that well craves a kind of wit. He must observe their mood on whom he jests, the quality of persons, that is the status, and the time. And like the haggard, that was a hawk, check at every feather that comes before his eyes. This is a practice as full of labor as a wise man's art. So negotiating class status when you're an entertainer is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly fraught. You say the wrong word to the wrong person, you can be in a lot of trouble. So, another way to identify yourself. We've got sexuality, we've got class status. Physical composition. In this period, they believed that there were 4 fluids circulating in your body, called the 4 humors, and depending on their mixture, this would impact your psychology and your physiology. So we have Sir Andrew Aguecheek actually talking about this. Act 2, Scene 3, Act 2, Scene 3, boom, 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 where he says, right at the beginning of it. He says, does not our lives consist of the four elements? It means the four humors that circulate in our body. Well, yes, right? But I'd rather it consisted of eating and drinking. And later he says, I eat too much beef, and that affects my humors and changes me. So there was this idea that physiology and psychology would define your identity to a certain point. Finally, there's this question of physical appearance. There was an idea in the Renaissance in the 16th century, which we now call Neoplatonism. And the idea was this, that beauty and virtue were synonymous. This means good-looking people are better or more likely to be virtuous than ugly people. Dumb idea, but look at so many movies to this day, right? We cast the beautiful people as the heroes, and we cast the less beautiful people as the villains. Think about comic book heroes, how that works. So all these things, your humoral balance, your sexuality, your class status, and your appearance would define your identity. And this play touches on all of them. Finally, what happens when you lose your identity? The classic example is Malvolio. Malvolio thinks, oh, I'm supposed to change. I'm supposed to wear yellow stockings and smile. I never do that. So he does, and Olivia thinks he's insane. If you change your identity, you must be mad. When Sebastian gets a proposal from Olivia, he thinks for a minute, I'm mad. I mean, how is this possible? Again, let me see if I can find this. Yes, Sebastian says this. He says, what relish is in this? How runs the stream? Or am I mad? Or is this a dream? If it thus be to dream, let me sleep. So he sort of accepts his madness. Antonio, when he's Sebastian's friend, who's following him in Illyria, he shouldn't be there because the authorities are looking for him. When he's interrogated by Orsino, he's called mad. You say Cesario's only been here for 3 months. I mean, he's been here 3 months. You're insane. So when people shift their identity or their perceptions, they're called insane in this play. The ending of the play. How is this all resolved? It resolves with Viola finally revealing who she is. And it takes a long time. There is the scene of recognition. And this is a classical idea. If you go back to Aristotle said that the best tragedies have something called anagnorisis. Big Greek word. Anagnorisis. It means recognition. Physical recognition. Oh, you are this person. You are that person. And this happens at the end of the play in a sort of protracted way, where they're saying, oh, you have a mole, or your father had a mole. When did your father die? They said, my father had a mole upon his brow, and so had mine. Isn't that enough? We'll stop right there. Oh no, and that day he died when Violet from her Earth is numbered 13 years. Oh, that record is live. Get to it. It takes them forever to come to this recognition. And when they do, of course, everything is resolved. And we end up with 3 marriages, Olivia and Sebastian, Orsino and Cesario, Sir Toby Belch and Maria. Seems like a happy ending. Question: how many of those marriages are going to succeed? Olivia has just met Sebastian. Just met him, right? That day. And married. She doesn't know anything about him. Orsino is marrying someone he thought was a boy, right? He doesn't know the real Viola. And Sir Toby Belch, the drunkard, is marrying below his station this maid. Again, I'm not placing any bets. I don't think it's going to end well. We also have, in this happy ending, a couple of somber notes. Antonio, Sebastian's friend, and I suspect would-be lover, is alone, watching his friend declare his marriage. He's on stage for the whole end of the play, and he doesn't get to say anything. What is he thinking? Malvolio is brought back from the dark room where he's been locked up, and the prank is exposed. And he says, "I will be revenged on the whole pack of you." And then he storms off stage. Sir Toby has a final fight with Sir Aguecheek. He finally gets tired of Aguecheek's idiocy and dismisses him. What's happened to poor Aguecheek? And then finally, the play ends with a song, Feste. According to the stage directions, he's alone. The clown sings to the audience. And that song, which you'll get to hear this afternoon or tonight, given a rousing version here. But if you read the lyrics, it's a melancholy, bittersweet song. It's about the stages of life, and at every stage, the wind and the rain fall. The wind and the rain. And it seems to be saying it never rains but pours, and that the environment, the natural world, is ultimately indifferent to us. We just keep going on. So it's a bittersweet moment. Now, last point about this production. So they make some changes in this production, great. Some of the gender politics I've been talking about, they change. So Antonio becomes Antonia. So it's a woman following Sebastian. So that homoerotic potential is not there. On the other hand, they take Malvolio and make Malvolio into Malvolia, a woman. So now there's a different homoerotic potential, or hope, between Malvolia and Lady Olivia. Finally, Carnival. What the heck? There is a Russian literary theorist by the name of Mikhail Bakhtin who talked about Renaissance literature and said there was the carnivalesque in a lot of Renaissance literature. The carnivalesque was this desire to overturn things, to make things topsy-turvy, to revel in our bodies, even the disgusting things that they do, just to break with society. He's arguing that this was a celebration that was built into medieval and Renaissance society, a carnival. And so this makes a perfect sense because it allows everyone, when you're at a carnival, to be, for one day, king of the bean. Thank you. Questions? Max will run around with the microphone, right in the front row.
What are you going to do in London?
Well, I am going to an academic conference on Christopher Marlowe, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare's and perhaps a collaborator. And I'm a huge fan of Marlowe. And I'm also going to leverage that to try to convince Christopher to finally put on a non-Shakespearean Renaissance play, like Marlowe's Dr. Faustus.
I've been reading a lot about the authorship of Shakespeare's plays, that they were not actually written by William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, but more likely by Edward de Vere, the 3rd Earl of Oxford. And I would like to know what your opinion is of that controversy.
Yeah, it's wrong. Blatantly, obviously wrong. If you like, go to my website, just Google my name, you'll go to my website and go to public lectures. And I have an hour-long public lecture called The Shakespeare Conspiracy, in which I methodically, and I think kind of deftly, show why it's baseless nonsense based in early 20th century class bias. Okay, so I won't go through it all now. It's online. Okay. The Shakespeare Conspiracy.
What can you tell us about Shakespearean audiences? Like, who came to see the plays? Was it everybody in society, all the classes, or was it bits of them, or?
Yeah, this is really interesting. There's been a lot of work done on this, especially by a scholar called Andrew Gurr. Yeah, it's basically everyone except royalty, but even minor nobility, visiting nobility, people. London was a huge, international trade place. So a lot of tourists, people thrown to town. Everybody, from the lowest people who were standing there only paid a penny to people who would get in the best seats you could imagine, where they could see well and everyone could see them. Right? So it's a real cross-section of society. But what's really interesting for me is the architecture of the Globe Theatre. You have this big open place where people can just stand. It's the cheapest. Then you have these tiered seats going up, right? So you have the poorer people are down here, the majority, and then the richer people up there looking down on the poor. So it's sort of an architectural model of the society itself. A lot of poor people, a lot of privileged people looking down on them.
What do you think is the most interesting thing about Twelfth Night?
Wow. The most interesting thing about Twelfth Night, that is, yikes. Like one thing. I'm having a real hard time. I mean, I think the mystery of Viola's decision is really interesting. In this production, I don't want to give away too much, but it's in the program too. The way they've interpreted her decision to dress like Cesario is basically as a tribute to her late brother. My brother is dead, therefore I will try to live his life, right, as he would have if he hadn't died in that shipwreck, which is an interesting directorial decision. I'm not sure the text supports it. So that it's interesting because it's a real puzzle. And if you're directing and if you're playing that character, you have to do a lot of psychological work to come up for a rationalization to justify that decision. So yeah, I think that's really interesting.
When Malvolio is locked up and being tormented, are we, the audience, complicit in hurting him?
Yeah, this is a good question. A lot of people, and it depends on the production. I mean, they lock him in a dark room. Feste adopts another character as sort of a priest, Topaz, and comes and interrogates him with sort of in a strange voice and asks him impossible questions. And it seems excessive. It seems sadistic. It seems that this prank has moved into torture, depending again on how you stage it. And I have seen productions where, yeah, the audience begins to feel a little uneasy about this. This has stopped being funny. This is a little icky, all right? That doesn't seem to have been the case for the Elizabethans. The Elizabethans, of course, were used to going to see spectacles of public suffering. Right, executions and tortures, and people would flock to see them, right? Just as they would flock to see animals being torn apart in bear baiting, which is actually mentioned in the play. So I think they were a little more hard-hearted than we were when it came to the spectacle of suffering, and would have found, for them, that would be mild. Being locked in a room and be tormented. They're used to seeing people, hung, drawn, and quartered. For us, yeah, it can seem a bit excessive, depending again on how it's staged. In this production, I don't think it is excessive. Yeah.
Hi. I see with the carnival, is there any elements of the carnival, and was there special training for the actors to do any kind of maneuvers or things like that? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not involved in directing and producing the play, so I don't know. But I will say this. These actors, where do you find actors who can act brilliantly, who can sing beautifully, dance, and some of them are astonishing musicians? Where do they make these people? Other questions? There was some over there, way over there. Yeah, by tradition, the questions always have to be as far away as possible.
With the prohibition against sort of interclass marriage, what was Olivia's justification of wanting to marry the servant of the Duke?
There wasn't a prohibition. There was just, I'm not aware of any specific laws in this period, but people tended to marry in their class or tried to marry above their class. Caesario says that he is a gentleman, right? So that's someone who does not toil, does not labor. So he's not of the lowest class. Yeah. And it's interesting, once it's revealed who everyone is, and Olivia is married to Sebastian, it is pointed out in the text that, oh, Sebastian is noble, so the marriage is fine, all right? And same with Viola, she's noble, so marry. So although it seems sort of, oh, aren't we being clever, ignoring class, when all the mask comes off, oh no, the classes are there, okay, we're not crossing any lines. Right, except for maybe Sir Toby marrying Maria, and again, I don't have high hopes for that marriage. But I have time for maybe one more question.
I was just wondering, with it being a comedy, if you see differences in the sense of humor from that era to ours, and what transcends.
Absolutely. I mean, you can buy or you can find online Elizabethan jest books, right, full of jokes. Not so funny. Yeah, absolutely. Part of it is vocabulary, right? And part of it is the referring to current events or current characters and stuff, which we no longer get. But a lot of it is just a very different sort of sense of humor. This is something you experience when you go to different cultures in the world today. Some people be more sarcastic, some people more sort of like slapstick. Yeah, it is different. It's hard to pinpoint, except that some of the humor seems strange. Dramatic, at least in things like jest books and stuff like that, and a lot of the jokes in Shakespeare we don't get, and very often they're cut. But the big things, slapstick, love adventures, mistaken identities, those things translate and continue to resonate to this day and continue to be funny. But there is a lot that is absolutely cut off from us because of cultural differences. Anyway, I'm going to be hanging out at the pavilion in just a couple of minutes. If you have any more questions, thank you so much for coming, and please enjoy Twelfth Night.